Thank you for staying with us. Let me bring in now Dr. Alex Awiti, public policy expert, joining me in studio now. What did you make of the president's speech? We were here with you before he spoke, then after.
Yeah. Well, Trevor, one would have anticipated that the president was going to attempt what I might call a high-wire act. He threw out a lot of stuff, which, substantively are debatable. But he prefaced or telegraphed what his thinking is with regard to the ruling on the BBI. And as you could tell, he is not amused. And he thinks that there is, to a large extent, judicial overreach in the sense that he describes as constitutional rigidity. But he also thinks that the judiciary does not understand the political stakes and is basically taking a very legalistic approach to the whole debate and does not entertain what he describes as the burden of choices, which he thinks is very critical, that should weigh into these discussions. So as this moves forward in the appeal process, you will see all of these kind of other elements. And he talked about stabilization of the country. And I think in his very words, he said that we have to approximate political stabilization by any means. So he's very clear on that, which is a stark departure from Deputy President William Ruto's stand, which is about independence of the three arms of government, the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. So that was one. I think the other kind of high-wire act was, he talked about the dramatic expansion of our economy, to about $100 billion today. I think what he didn't grapple with, which again, so you could see there were very interesting juxtapositions between his speech and Ruto's, which was very short but very succinct in terms of kind of also premiering his political platform. The president did not indulge as in a conversation on the distribution elements of that 100 billion and the growth over this period of time. Inequality has expanded. We are one of the most unequal economies, societies in the world today. And there's still hundreds of thousands of young people, millions, who are unemployed, despite the fact that they've completed the education in the way that we've prescribed it, either a bachelor's degree or gone to college, have a diploma, etc. I think the other part that was also important was his discussion at length on the debt capital, which was really important. He talked about the moribund meter gauge railway that is now being revamped in central Kenya. And of course, we've got the Kisumu one also on track. He talked about the ports. He talked about the 1972 Lamu project. So in a sense, that was kind of his side of the discussion. And of course, the renal units that are now from about 4 to about 58 distributed evenly across the counties. So that was part of saying, look at what I've achieved, which surpasses by many, many proportions what the first three presidents achieved. So in a sense, the president was basically saying, look at my track record. And if he is going to insert himself in the succession conversation, he's going to say, this is going to be a continuation of my legacy. But he also talked about something which I thought was a little careless. It's not good to say this about the president's remarks. He talked about the 2.3 billion that has been transferred to the counties. But he was very clear that nobody knows where the money is. And I thought he abdicated his responsibility there. And it goes back to the discussion we had yesterday about the governors running rogue and not being held accountable by the MCAs who were emasculated in many respects and really constrained to exercise their legislative oversight over county governments. So that in a nutshell, to me, was this kind of high-wire act the president attempted, basically being very careful but knowing that everything about his big infrastructure projects are really debatable in terms of the sense that they have pushed our debt levels extremely high. But he said, don't look at the road. Look at where it takes us. It's not just about the road, but what's going to happen in between. So he attempted some kind of a nuanced and sophisticated justification of some of his priorities.
From a public policy perspective, what is the impact of the presidential speech on a day when there's a case management conference coming up for the BBI #1, and he then leaves the judiciary between a rock and a hard place? Because if they rule for, it will be seen like they cowed to the pressure of the executive. If they rule against, it will be seen like they continue to go against the executive deliberately.
But the good thing about President Kenyatta is that he does not shy away from wading into these kinds of things. And he basically created the backdrop. He said in 2017, you nullified my election on a technicality. He still does not take that very kindly.
Yeah.
And so those were his kind of battle cry calls. And it is very clear that he wants to insert himself in an ending that basically is favorable for the BBI agenda, because he thinks political stabilization must be achieved by all means. Deputy President Ruto is a constitutionalist in the way that he framed his remarks, and he is of the opinion that we cannot just willy-nilly tamper with the constitution. It is sacrosanct. Uhuru is saying no. This constitutional rigidity is our Achilles heel. We need to tackle the critical social, political dimensions that enfeeble our democracy.
Yeah. When you walked in, you were talking about corruption. There was no mention of it at all.
No, he didn't. And that's the question, because he himself, the 2.3 billion, how much of that has been lost? The 100 billion GDP, the 3 trillion budget that we're going to read. Nearly every year for the last 20 years, we lose 1/3 of our budget resources to civil servants who cannot account for the money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me bring in Simeha on this, and at this point we're talking about the individual level, and he was calling this the 4 legacy frames, economic accelerations. And Simeha, he mentions that the previous administrations issued 6 million title deeds in 50 years.
Yeah.
President Uhuru's administration has issued 5.1 million title deeds in 7 years only. And he says on a pro rata basis, this is 7 times what the previous administrators had done combined. He also said that 20% of the titles issued are in Nyanza region. The most are in Kisumu County. Do you see a disconnect between the land issues facing the country today, and for him to chest stamp almost that he gave 5.1 million title deeds, 7 times what the other administrations did, but land issues have still not been addressed completely in this country?
Trevor, iko shida, because if a president in this century in Kenya is happy to compare himself to Kenyatta 1, Daniel Arap Moi, Mwai Kibaki, especially given what Mwai Kibaki and company did in 2007-8, that the president is happy to use that as his standard to say, look, I'm better than those guys, those wazees. Iko shida. Secondly, issuing of title deeds. Should a president be really, showcasing issuing of title deeds? That is a matter of fact, clerical work of people who work in the lands departments, that they ought to issue title deeds. It should not be an issue. And by the way, for me in Bunyore, for someone else in Isuka, for someone else in Maragoli and so on, we own the land. Whether you give us a title deed or not, it's neither here nor there. It's not priority number 1. Though it's a priority in terms of, land ownership, the legal aspects and so on and so forth. But what I'm saying that he's placing this thing of title deeds on a pedestal, whereas there are serious land problems in this country in terms of land grabbing, in terms of access to land by millions of poor Kenyans who have absolutely no access to land, in terms of hoarding of hundreds of thousands of acres by locals and foreigners, the elite group, that transnational group, holding onto this land as their playground in Laikipia, in Narok, and many other places. Whereas you have squatters, millions crammed in small spaces, roadsides and so on. And then you begin to showcase issuing of title deeds, that the president should leave to clerical people in the various departments at county and national level in the lands department, not for focusing by the president.
Yeah, but Cynthia Mutere, in all fairness, there is a bit of an improvement. If in 50 years there was only just 6 million title deeds, and in less than 7 years is given 5.1 million title deeds, that is commendable work, considering we also know that there's a National Lands Information Management System that has just been launched. The RD has now gone digital. That is something commendable, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Remember that this is the second last function that the president is having. Next year's Madaraka Day will be his last. And so for the 2 functions, he's probably paced himself to at least drop a hint of what his legacy has left behind, besides the BBI, besides the 4-point agenda that the Jubilee government campaigned on that they have not delivered on. He's trying to let us know that this is what else the government of Jubilee has done. Remember, the land question has been something that has been a bit of a challenge. And so he needs to let us know that there's something being done about it. Yes, he shouldn't have gone into the intricacies of it, probably. Maybe it's too weighty for some people to hear about it, but I think it is important that where there are successes, that you're able to highlight them so that the people can know. If you don't talk about these big things, then people don't know. And so you should not get bashed about highlighting some of these things. Take stock of where you are, where you're going, and now that you're leaving office, what have you been able to do besides what the entire country is waiting for us to do, as in to go into a referendum? And so it's important that the Land Commission, these institutions that have been established, and you're talking about the National Land Information Database System that should be churning out this information, that they actually now do their work and they are seen to be releasing this information to the general public. We don't know how now the government system is supposed to be now releasing information, but some of these institutions that have been constitutionally put in place needs to be seen to be working, and that they're releasing this information to the general public so that we appreciate that government is actually working in certain areas where it has been a challenge. Remember in the last election, his family has been put into question with land, and so he needs to be seen to be doing something about land and how the management of land is going. And so that is important, I feel, that even when he's speaking about now devolution and how much money is being released there, he cannot come down and actually manage what is happening. I mean, Semeka had mentioned how he's really on putting the government of Vihiga County to check. The president cannot come and use a state function and start now managing devolved governments and the governments around here. We know that there have been successes in healthcare in probably Machakos. Right now in Busia County, we have at least 10 to 12 wards that are releasing these service vehicles that are going to be acting as ambulances and that are going to be generally doing services in the wards. Yeah. And so there are successes, there are little successes that are happening in the devolved counties that the president cannot come and now micromanage for us. And so that's important that he highlights some of the successes of the national government.
All right. Mukwanja, what do you make of this title deeds issue? Is it a gain that we're supposed to celebrate?
You know, Trevor, for me, you see, land is one of the most important factor of economic production because we are simply still very much an agroeconomy. And for the president to have spared some few paragraphs in his speech to articulate land issues is important. But at what level is where I am having difficulties. I think we have more monumental challenges other than issuing title deeds, and I agree with the reference by my brother Semeka that is a little bit more clerical because there are more monumental policy issues that the president will focus on. We have a challenge of land tenure system in this country that breeds inequality, and other than ethnicity and corruption, land has become one of the motive issues that needs to be addressed from the very top level. Number two is the issues of administration. I mean, you really take a lot of time to process this title. You take a lot of time to charge this title, to discharge this title, and even using it in collateral to get capital is a challenge. And I think these are the service delivery issues that I expect that the president would be articulating for those ones that have mean well for utilizing land for production. The historical land injustices, as long as you have the Ndungu land report issue still gathering dust on the shelves, I think we're just scratching on the surface, not going deep to address the land issues. If you look at the scandals that are really coming around the issues of land, we currently have the active case at the National Land Commission on the Cabanas issue about acquiring it for the Kenya National Highways Authority to utilize it for the expressway. We have had many other issues, including how expensive our infrastructure projects can get because of acquisition of land to be able to develop this infrastructure. I think these are the issues that we need to have a president addressing himself to. The mere data around how many titles have been issued. There are reasons why those governments failed, and I think that to me, is a low-hanging fruit that you cannot stop the president from picking, but there are better issues that we would like the president to address himself to in regards to land teacher system, land administration, and the whole issues around utilizing as a very important, factor of economic production, because we are largely an agro economy as a country. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Awiti, is that something worth mentioning?
It goes back to my initial opening comments that this was a high-wire act. And every element of the president's speech is debatable. And if you wanted details, then you ask the country, how much time do you have? 5 days for the president to discuss the details of these issues. But I think, not to make a fine point of this land question, it's been 58 years, and the pace of issuing titles just gathered steam. For most of us who come from Western Kenya, we know that most of those areas have not been adjudicated. There are no titles. And there's been a lot of subdivision, which happens in many of our land holding systems, with land passing from your father, from your grandfather to your father, and your father to you, and you to your children. So it is an important question. And one economist, Anando de Soto, called this the dead capital. This is the real dead capital. And the fact that you don't have papers and title for these pieces of land, you cannot then charge them as collateral to leverage capital to do anything. So I think it's an important step. There are a lot of details, and I think there's one part that we missed in the transitional justice process from colonialism to independence. And we know what the land holding in the colonial days were. We know the question around the White Islands and who held the land and how the land was transferred. Jomo Kenyatta at that time, I think, borrowed £5 million from the British government to buy the land from the British and redistribute it. There are questions around how that worked. So if you want to walk this back 58 years ago, how much time do we have? The political consequences of that are also something that we have to reckon with. But I guess going forward, we just need to basically understand what is it that we need to do right now to get the economy moving in the direction that it should move. I think the president headlined critical elements of his achievement and the direction that he needs to go. And I think the pivoting of his Big Four agenda to a big push agenda, predicated on infrastructure, the growth in the economy, the expansion of constitutional provisions to basically change the character and the operations of the executive is critical. So I think at some point, without dwelling on these things too much and making it too fine an academic point, what are the big questions that we need to deal with? Where are the gaps in the discussion? And the president headlining these creates an opportunity for these kinds of debate. So all of us sitting on this, let's use our platforms to basically drive the conversations. Yes, it is clerical. How do you start to engage the Ministry of Lands to move these things forward? Yes, there are bigger issues the president should not be dwelling on. And I agree with all of that. But we can't spend an entire segment of a conversation dwelling on the minutiae of the details that are missed when the president is making presidential pronouncement, and there is an entire bureaucracy to deal with these things. There's a citizenry to then engage in productive, progressive, critical debate on these issues in other platforms. We can't keep laying blame and calling the president on the shortcomings of his speech.
On the second last part of his speech, he talks about restoration of dignity. And he says in our constitution, the restoration of dignity is a continuous process rather than a one-off activity. The question this Madaraka Day is how well we have rendered this aspect of our freedom. How well has it been rendered? Restoration. It talks about maternal health care, it talks about renal units, it talks about the issue around dialysis sessions, several of them. But how well have we rendered the restoration of dignity?
Well, it goes back to the discussion we had yesterday about what is the role of citizens in injecting themselves in a dignified demeanor and in creating a dignified relationship between them and the government. You talk about dignity. The way our police treat our citizens is deplorable. It's horrible in many respects. The way we are treated by our own government officials when you go to government offices to ask for services is insane. It is just terrible. The way we treat ourselves, each other as citizens, sometimes is just below anything that you can describe as decent. So we are culpable together, collectively, as citizens. And yes, I've seen everybody assaulting the president on this dignity and said, Murkomen said that he is the purveyor of indignified treatment in this country, especially his relationship with the judiciary. So I think at some point this country has to come to a very sober conversation. And Semenya said, let's have a public conversation about the undignified issues that face us as a country.
Yeah.
It is not a question of one man basically solving all our problems. It's about the joint collective conversation that we need to have as a republic.
Yeah.
The president of Burundi was in Kenya this week and was at Kisumu yesterday. And I'm sure he must have been really, really pleasantly surprised at the level of public conversation that we have.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the president and the deputy president don't see eye to eye on many issues, but they share a platform, and we can have a decent conversation where they frame two competing strategies for how to move the country forward.
Yeah.
This is where we need to go as a country.
Okay. Simeha, what do you make of this restoration of dignity aspect of it? How well have we rendered this aspect?
I think it's such a critical question, and thank you for bringing it up. For me, the worst form of indignity is what citizens have been subjected to and what they also have subjected themselves to in form of a slave mentality, a colonial mentality, that you cannot speak truth to power, that you cannot question power, that you must just accept the way things are. The other day on Friday, I was having, not on Friday, the day before yesterday, on Monday, I was having a briefing with the media in Vihiga on an issue of public interest. And some junior officer butts in and wants to stop it. And he says it is not authorized. And then he's horrified that I stand up to him. He's horrified that I can question him. And there are also a few people around who are horrified. That slave mentality, that colonial mentality, that you cannot question your governor when he's stealing from you, that you cannot question your MCA, your MP, your senator, your president, when they are presiding over a looting system. And that looting system, the victim is you, the slave, or the colonized. That is the worst form of indignity, and that is what makes us accept to live in an undignified environment. That's what makes us accept what is thrown at us, what is set by other standards that are set by other people and thrown at us, and we are sort of told, accept that, that is good for you, and we accept. And the few who question critically are seen as rebels, radical, activists, and whatnot, dissatisfied, and so on and so forth, or just people who are pursuing sour grapes agenda. That is the worst form of indignity, and this is what I was indicting our education system for. We need to do something about citizen education so that we have an education system that liberates the African mind, that we Africans can stand for ourselves, develop ourselves, question power, and demand better for ourselves.
Okay. Cynthia, how much of this is the citizens' role, the restoration of dignity?
The Constitution has provided public participation, and that is the role of the citizen. We do bring our own dignity when we participate. It's important for citizens to participate. And I think when we see leadership upholding the rule of law, we saw the president uphold the rule of law when he waited for the judgment of the Supreme Court for the presidential, when there was the presidential petition that had nullified his election, and he respected the courts and the judiciary. And the actions of leaders actually affect the citizens. And the citizens know that this is not a jungle republic, that we can actually voice our opinion and it can be heard. And so when we see that the handshake principles, the president and Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga are upholding the rule of law, they're waiting for the judicial process to take its effect, then the people can participate, seeing that the leaders have set the example that this is not a jungle republic, this is not a failed state, that the people can actually voice what they want to say. Having this conversation in the media is also a part of it, that we are actually raising these voices, and the voices of the people can be seen to be heard when we are able to have these conversations, when people are questioning, when others are dissenting, when people are, we have all these voices coming to have this conversation. And that's what conversation and dialogue is all about, so that we come to an agreed conclusion to move forward in a peaceable way for the benefit of the entire republic. And so I think it is important that the citizens participate, as the Constitution has provided for us.
Yeah. Mkwanja, what do you think before we get into the last part of the president's speech?
I think it's a very important discussion to have, and they are both duty bearers and right holders. And for those ones that are governing, it's important that they observe the rule of law. They promote respect for fundamental rights to enable people access services and access them in an accountable and inclusive manner. So unless we have this balance of the the rights-based approach, I think it's going to be difficult to continue this conversation.
Yeah.
And we're only harboring on the issues of poverty on diseases, when we know very well that, for instance, if you go down to the ground, there are challenges of utilizing NHIF, how the president can confidently articulate these issues when all the challenges around NHIF are not tackled. It's a little bit disturbing for a common citizen like myself. Yeah. So we need to continually address the issues of why the government needs to, particularly those ones that are in responsibilities, why they need to respect, to adhere to the rule of law, why they need to promote, the fundamental rights of the ones they are governing, and why, Kenyans need to move away from mere participation to acting on the facts that they have in order to promote transparency, accountability, and inclusivity in governance processes.
Okay. Dr. Awiti, the last part of the president's speech was on political stabilization. Yes. In fact, he says, if the political elite remains short-termist and self-serving, the consequences of our choices will become a permanent burden on our people. He finally says the political class is invited to upgrade their status from being politicians to being leaders. Yeah. From being politicians obsessed with personal gain to people who focus on our national pain. Yeah. How then do we achieve this?
So I think this is really at the heart of our conversation. Yeah. How do you remake Kenya in the image, not only of the future, but of our aspirations? And our aspirations are very clear. We want a stable, democratic, livable society where everybody has an equal opportunity. But the trick has always been the competing short-term interests of the political class, and sometimes also of citizens who call themselves the middle class, who basically are handmaidens of the political class, who acquiesce to the politicians, hoping that some crumbs will fall down on their tables, and from under the table of the politicians. I think the big question really is, the question of political stabilization is at the heart of the structure and the framing of the BBI. Yeah. And I think that's where the president kept going. And the big debate, the big conversations that we'll see in the judicial process, in the conversations that are going to go to the appeal court and the Supreme Court, is going to be the overarching political imperative of the BBI conversation, beyond the legalistic, narrow constitutional interpretations of how does the process start. Is it a parliament-driven process, or is it a people-driven process? I think he wants to elevate the discussion beyond that and say, what are the big stakes? And for him, the big stake is really the political stabilization debate, and to move all of us towards a long-term kind of cast of the political lens. Yeah. And for him to have said that pursuing the political stabilization agenda should be achieved by all means, and politicians need to morph from politicians to leaders. Yeah. That's a very, very big ask. And I don't think the people that we call politicians are necessarily leaders. And a lot of our leaders are somewhere else, and the politicians are busy doing something else in the Houses of Parliament. So yesterday I talked about that we need a philosopher key. Yeah. I think many aspects of Uhuru's speech yesterday were very philosophical, very aspirational, summoning our better angels. The question still remains, are the citizens of Kenya, are we willing to be citizens and not still remain in this mindset of subjects of some distant authority, which is our heritage? We were colonial subjects. We became citizens on June 1st when we earned the right for self-governance. Now the question is, are we willing to walk down that path to the very end and become true citizens and begin to take the full responsibility that come with the right of citizenship? I think that's the real question. It is a very, very philosophical conversation. There are no empirical elements that you can draw to this. It is really an aspirational thing. Okay. Can the country summon its better angels?
All right. Simea, what do you think? How do we get politicians to move from politicians to leaders?
Thank you. And I just love where Dr. Witty has left it. It's about the duty of citizens. It is them, it is us who are going to make sure that we have a class of politicians who act as leaders and not demagogues and not rogues. But unfortunately, a lot of the citizens we have in national level counties who acquiesce to these corrupt politicians, the kind of citizens I call useful idiots, basically, that who think that because they receive a little bit of this that fall off the table of these corrupt politicians, they must support that system at all costs. That they must say this so-and-so is ours, so we are not going to allow you to criticize him and so on and so forth. Until we tackle that, and it's in the mind. It is in the mind. When the president says political stabilization, some people often take it for keeping quiet, not being critical, not criticizing. Okay. Political stabilization is about focusing on issues. So that when Raila Odinga challenges you, you don't meet his political challenge by attacking Luos, or you don't meet his political challenge by wanting to divide Luos and Luyas so that you break Raila Odinga's political support. But you focus on the issues they are raising. He is raising. When Semeja Jamie challenges you on your corruption, on your theft and plunder, you don't respond by attacking him and where he comes from and what he does and where he sleeps. You attack the issues Semeja Jamie is raising about your corruption, your thieving, and so on and so forth. That really is what political stabilization, Trevor, ought to be about.
Mutere?
I would say that the political stabilization is one of the legacies, once again, that the president is leaving behind. And he's saying bye-bye to the nation, being the second and final Madaraka Day that, second to final Madaraka Day that he's hosting. In his final, in his closing submissions, I would say that he's actually giving this as one of his legacies, that he does not want to live a divided country. And so political stabilization is important. I think he's actually even paraphrasing our national anthem when the aspects of service be our earnest endeavor, that we are striving to serve, that we are able to have individuals, people who are able to really steward public resource for the good of the public. He's talking about that our homeland of Kenya and the fruit of our labor, that we will be able to stand and defend. So he's paraphrased this in his final speech, and I think the national anthem is really coming out. There are one-liners in the national anthem, but he's really now trying to say that political stability, a united country will give us a place where we are able to serve, and that service will be our earnest endeavor, that we will be able to see the fruits of our labor, and that we will be able to stand firm to defend this.
Mkwanja, finally on this, very briefly, how do we achieve the political stabilization that he's talking about? Mkwanja, you're on mute. Kindly unmute first. Just unmute your microphone before you wind up on this. Mkwanja, are you with us now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're clear.
Great. I think that this is a useful debate that the president brought out, and particularly what Dr. Awiti has mentioned, that, you know, leadership is a relationship. And I'll go into that, but just first to agree that it's a relationship between the followers and the leader. And if we look at Kenyans as followers, first we need to improve the quality of the citizens to ensure that the relationship of influence is not really based on authority, but rather persuasion. And the persuasion must be based on issues that as well that Semeja is pointing out. And the follower and the leader are not equal. But that does not mean that one of the players should not be active. They should make sure that the players practice multi-directional influence. I do not know to what extent then Kenyans as citizens have a positive influence over their leaders in terms of relationship. And thirdly, the follower and the leaders, the citizens in this case, and our politicians, must have a real intention for real changes. By intention, I mean that leaders and followers need to promote and purposefully seek changes. And the realness of this means that the changes intended by the leaders particularly and their followers must be substantial. And I think this is a conversation that we need to require. We must be reminded that leadership is not what leaders do.
Yeah.
Leadership is what leaders and followers do jointly in a relationship of mutuality. And therefore, as long as the key is the desired changes that must only reflect the wishes of the leader, but also the desires of the followers, then we are headed in the right direction. So on this question of political stability, we cannot just look at the politicians alone, because their key issue is aggregating interest. We must also challenge Kenyans as followers to improve their quality so that the relationship of influence followers, the intention of for really changes, and the changes that we really want to cause are really about mutuality and are really about what we believe in as a country. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Gentlemen and lady, Dr. Alex Awiti, public policy expert, Joseph Simeya, political analyst, Cynthia Mutere, chairperson, Ford Kenya Women League, and Franklin Mkwanja, executive director, Center for Multi-Party Democracy. We appreciate your time this morning and talking about the president and the speech after Madaraka Day. Let's see what you're saying online really quick before we wrap this up and give it time for Workout Wednesday with Willis Raburu. Here's what you're saying online. We'll sample just a few of them in the interest of time. Start off with Basho. Alas, as third arm of government, judiciary is an important pillar for the smooth functioning of democracy and thereby to establish good governance in a nation by maintaining peace and imparting justice and enjoyment of fundamental rights. Quote, work for Kenyans, all right? See what else you're saying. Engineer Lazaro says President Madaraka's speech was only appealing to judges to balance between dignity of the nation and the importance of inclusivity when making their rulings on national matters. All right, Jacob Abere says national conversation and agenda discussion belongs to the people. Two assemblies, National Assembly and the Senate, plus its twin sister, the executive, have failed in their roles. Now Wanjiku's remain with the judiciary, and I foresee it defending the constitution jealously. All right. Thank you so much for that. We have to leave it at that point now. We're taking a quick break here. When we come back, it's time for Workout Wednesday with Willis Raburu. See you in a bit.